The Church faced major problems by the 900s. As its wealth and power grew, discipline weakened and corruption increased. Some priests could barely read their prayers, while some popes were immoral. Many bishops and abbots cared more about their social status and money than their duties as spiritual leaders, and some lived in extravagant luxury while their followers starved. Positions in the clergy were sometimes sold by bishops, a practice called simony, which added to the corruption of the leadership of the Church. The practice of lay investiture put kings in control of church bishops. In response to these problems, a spiritual revival spread across Europe beginning in the 900s and 1000s. This revival was led by certain monasteries where reformers wanted to return to the basic principles of the Christian religion. New religious orders were founded, and their moral example led popes to launch major reforms in the Catholic Church. Over the next 300 years, the Church and medieval life changed dramatically as a result. In the early 900s, the monastery of Cluny in eastern France began the process of reform. First, it revived and enforced the Benedictine rule of obedience, poverty, and chastity for all members. Then it refused to allow nobles or bishops to interfere in monastery affairs. Instead, Cluny was placed under the direct protection of the Pope. Soon, Cluny's reputation for virtue inspired the founding of similar monasteries throughout Western Europe. By the year 1000, there were 300 houses under Cluny's leadership. In the 11th century, new monastic orders arose and became important catalysts for reform. One of these was the Cistercian order. It was founded in 1098 by a group of monks who were unhappy with the lack of discipline at their own monastery. Cistercian monasticism spread rapidly from southern France into the rest of Europe. The Cistercians were strict. They ate a simple diet, and each member had only a single robe. All decorations were eliminated from their churches and monastic buildings. More time for prayer and manual labor was gained by spending fewer hours at religious services. While Benedictine monks spent hours inside the monasteries in personal prayer, Cistercians took their faith directly to the people. More than any other person, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux embodied the new spiritual ideal of Cistercian monasticism. He was an outstanding preacher, and his dedication to God and reputation for holiness reportedly inspired many men to join the Cistercian order. The reform movement begun at Cluny influenced the papacy. Pope Leo IX, who took office in 1049, enforced church laws against simony and the marriage of priests. In 1073, Gregory VII became pope and began another push for reform. Although he failed to defeat the German emperor in the controversy over lay investiture, he did outlaw marriage for priests and prohibited simony. The popes who followed Leo and Gregory reorganized the church to continue the policy of reform. In the 1100s and 1200s, the church was restructured to resemble a kingdom, with the pope at its head. The pope's group of advisors was called the Papal Curia. The Curia also acted as a court and developed canon law on matters such as marriage, divorce, and inheritance. Diplomats for the Pope traveled through Europe to deal with bishops and kings. The Church collected taxes in the form of tithes, which it then used to provide social services such as caring for the sick and the poor. Most hospitals in medieval Europe were operated by the Church. By the early 1200s, popes had achieved remarkable success in their reforms. In the early 1200s, wandering friars traveled from place to place preaching and spreading the Church's ideas. Like monks, friars took vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Unlike monks, friars did not live apart from the world in monasteries. Instead, they traveled widely and preached to the poor throughout Europe's towns and cities. Friars owned nothing and lived by begging. The first order of friars, the Franciscans, was founded by St. Francis of Assisi, the son of a rich Italian merchant. After being captured during a local war, he had a series of spiritual experiences that led him to abandon all his worldly goods in order to live and preach in poverty. St. Francis's simplicity, love of others, and devotion to God soon attracted a band of followers, all of whom took vows agreeing to reject all property and live by working and begging for their food as they preached the virtues of Christianity. The Franciscans became very popular. They lived among the people, preaching repentance of sins and aiding the poor and sick. Their calls for a return to the simplicity and poverty of the early church, reinforced by their own example, were especially effective. The Franciscans also undertook missionary work, first throughout Italy and then to all parts of Europe and later the world. The Dominican order was founded by a Spanish priest, Dominic de Guzman, who wanted to defend church teachings from heresy, or ideas that are counter to basic church doctrines. The intense spiritual revival that began after 1000 had led to the emergence of religious movements not authorized by the Church. Some of these movements advocated ideas that conflicted with the authority and doctrines of the Church. Dominic believed that a new religious order of men who lived in poverty and could preach effectively would best be able to attack heresy. Dominic emphasized education. As a result, many Dominicans became scholars. Like the Franciscans, the Dominicans were active missionaries in both Europe and the world. Women were actively involved in the spiritual revival of the later Middle Ages. The number of women joining religious houses grew dramatically. Female intellectuals found convents a haven for their activities. Most educated women of the Middle Ages were nuns. The mystic and poet Hildegard of Bingen founded a Benedictine convent in western Germany in 1147. She was one of the first female composers and was an important contributor to the body of music known as Gregorian chant. Her work is remarkable because she succeeded at a time when music was almost exclusively the domain of men. Women also participated actively in the Dominican and Franciscan religious movements. In 1212, the Franciscan order for women, known as Poor Clares, was founded by Clare and Francis of Assisi. Unlike men, women were not allowed to travel from place to place as preachers, but they did live in poverty and work to help the poor and sick. As part of its sweeping effort at reform, the Church created a court called the Inquisition, or Holy Office, to deal with heresy. The Inquisition's goal was to identify people who had committed heresy and convince them to confess. The court developed a regular procedure to find and try heretics. Beginning in 1252, the Inquisition added the use of torture to extract confessions. Prayers, charity, and pilgrimage were the most common punishments. When people refused to repent, more extreme punishments might be inflicted, including being turned over to the state for torture and execution. 13th century Christians believed that the only path to salvation was through the Church. To them, heresy was a crime against God and a threat to the community. In their minds, using force to save souls from damnation was entirely justified. Another major way that the people of Europe demonstrated their intense faith was through the construction of larger and more magnificent churches. In the past, churches had been built in the Romanesque style. To avoid the danger of fire, the roof of a Romanesque church was a long, round stone vault called a barrel vault. A vault is a term for a curved roof made of masonry. Because these stone roofs were extremely heavy, Romanesque churches required massive pillars and walls to hold them up. This left little space for windows, making Romanesque churches dark and gloomy inside. Two innovations of the 12th century made possible a new style of church building known today as Gothic. The combination of ribbed vaults with pointed arches replaced the barrel vault of Romanesque churches and enabled builders to make Gothic churches higher than their Romanesque counterparts. The use of pointed arches and ribbed vaults created an impression of upward movement, a sense of weightless upward thrust that implied the energy of God. Another technical innovation, the flying buttress, was basically a heavy arched pier of stone built onto the outside of the walls that made it possible to distribute the weight of the church's vaulted ceilings outward and downward, and thus reduce the thickness of the heavy walls used in Romanesque churches to hold the weight of the massive barrel vaults. The thinner walls of Gothic cathedrals could be filled with magnificent stained glass windows. The preoccupation with colored light in Gothic cathedrals was inspired by the belief that natural light was a symbol of the divine light of God. These windows, along with much of the interior and exterior space of the cathedral, were decorated with images from the Bible and Christian history. Not only did these decorations satisfy the artist's desire to honor God, but in the largely illiterate society of medieval Europe, they provided a means by which people could be taught the basic beliefs of Christianity. The first fully Gothic church was built near Paris between 1140 and 1150. A product of northern France, the Gothic style had spread by the mid-13th century to England, Spain, Germany, and Eastern Europe. The most brilliant Gothic cathedrals, such as the famous Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, were built in France. A Gothic cathedral was the work of an entire community. All classes of society contributed to its construction. Money was raised from wealthy townspeople who had profited from renewed trade and industries, as well as from kings and nobles. Master masons, who were both architects and engineers, designed the cathedrals. They drew up plans and supervised the work of construction. Stonemasons and other craftspeople were paid a daily wage and provided the skilled labor to build the cathedrals. The construction of so many Gothic cathedrals between 1170 and 1279 reflected both the intense religious faith of Western Europeans and their growing wealth and confidence. The renewed faith and growing strength of Europe also led to war. In 1093, the Byzantine emperor asked the Pope for help against Muslim Turks who were attacking his territory. In 1095, Pope Urban II urged the leaders of Western Europe to begin a crusade or holy war. He wanted Christians to regain control over the city of Jerusalem and the entire Holy Land from the Muslims. This territory in the Middle East was the site of Jesus' life and teaching, and held great economic and strategic value. Many crusades were launched. The First Crusade ended with the capture of Jerusalem after a bloody siege. In the famous Third Crusade, the great English king Richard the Lionhearted fought with the powerful Muslim leader Saladin for control of Jerusalem. In the end, the Crusades failed, and the atrocities committed by both sides left a legacy of bitterness and hatred between Christians and Muslims. Not all the Crusades were fought in the Holy Land. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 wound up attacking Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. In Spain, Crusaders fought a long and bloody war called the Reconquista to drive the Muslims out of the country. The Reconquista lasted from the 1100s until 1492, when the last Muslim stronghold at Granada fell. Jews in Spain and all over Europe were often victims of the Crusaders, who were quick to attack anyone that was not Christian. The Crusades had many effects on Europe. The power and prestige of the Pope was hurt by the failure of the Crusades, and the deaths of many knights and nobles enabled kings in England and France to increase their power. Contact with the Muslim world sparked trade and also brought many new ideas and technologies to Western Europe that eventually helped spark the Renaissance in the 1400s and 1500s.